Hello everyone. It is once again that time for another submarine test. This time we finally get to experience some new things, namely Tier 10 submarines, the Balao and the U-2501 from the German side. And we actually have access to some captain perks, which are very much works in progress, as well as the consumables, specifically for submarines, which are also very much works in progress. As you can see on T and Y, I have basically new. They don't even have an icon yet. The gameplay basis is quite the same. You can launch torps before or after you ping. There are some perks that enhance it. I'll get into that a bit later. But the fundamental concept is still there. You launch torpedoes, you ping the target. The first ping makes your torpedoes home very aggressively this time. Like, I'm talking insanely aggressive homing to the extent that I've been able to nail DDs, dodging cruisers and so forth. And the second ping gives you citadel damage. It enhances your damage. So getting a second ping means that, well, 5 torpedoes is enough to just devastate this Des Moines with 5 citadels each. But landing those double pings is somewhat more difficult, or quite a bit more difficult than it used to be. There's the incentive for diving is that on the surface your ping velocity is roughly 500 meters per second, which, if you consider something like a North Carolina, which has infamously slow shells, travels at 700 meters per second. So it does go in a straight line, of course, but it's about 500 meters per second on surface, whereas underwater your ping travels at roughly 900 to 1,000, depending on the nation. I think the Americans had 1,000 meters per second. So basically your ping is twice as fast, and of course having a significantly faster ping makes it much easier to land those double pings that you need to enhance your damage. Now, there is some counterplay available to the pings in the sense that, well, you'll see it against this Vermont. I ping him once, I get the homing on the torpedoes, and then I want to ping him a second time to get that extra damage on him. The target does know he's being pinged, the section lights up, and he does know when he's being double pinged as well. And what this Vermont does is he waits until he spots the torpedoes that are coming straight for him, and when that happens he's actually going to damage con, and you'll see that the ping disappears and it says torpedoes have lost their target. Your torpedoes lost their target, and that means he just damage conned, and instead of the citadel and the hard hits, well, suddenly the damage from 4 torpedoes is about 14,000 damage. So significant downgrade there. I mentioned that there are some perks that you can do. I'm using a perk, for example, that makes the first ping last a shorter time, but if minus 10%, but if you get 2 pings, it lasts longer. So if you manage to nail the double ping on the target, then you get plus 20% duration. In fact, many of these new submarine perks are very much aggressive trade-offs. There are some problems here though, namely using your damage con, especially on something like a Battleship that has an incredibly long damage con. Well, I just wait out the 20 seconds. Actually, I don't even need to be waiting, because pings are basically infinitely spammable. They don't affect your magical fairy dust, your mana, whatever you want to call it. So once he's used his damage con, I just keep pinging and I keep torping, and there's not really a whole lot he can do about it. So from a Battleship perspective, the counterplay is extremely limited, especially if you can't really disengage from the submarine, because the submarines are quite fast. You can see I'm underwater, I'm doing, what, 22 knots. For something like a Vermont, I'm basically matching his speed, but I'm undetected. There we go, going for the double ping once again. There is another perk that I'm also running that I should mention. It's really poorly formulated, but the concept is that if you launch your torpedoes before you ping, you get a 15% torpedo damage boost. That is if you get, I think, a double ping as well. I'm not sure. They kind of used Google Translate on Russian perk names, so a lot of them are really muddy and quite hard to understand. But the concept seems to be that if you launch your torps first, then ping, this 4-point perk does give you bonus damage, and you can see, of course, the difference in damage. Those 2 torps did as much as the 4 torps earlier on the other Vermont. My problem really here is that once a Battleship kind of gets caught in this cycle of being chased by a submarine that's constantly pinging them, there's not a whole lot you can do. turning away doesn't really help, and the other issue is that these torpedoes have a really high chance of breaking modules. In fact, I keep breaking battleships' engines, which is something I find really silly. But if you have a ping on a target, you saw I broke the engine on that other Vermont, if you have a ping on a target and your torpedoes are going in, you're basically either guaranteed a flood or something broken, and since you're constantly spamming pings, constantly spamming torps, well, there's a flood, for example, his damage can in no way keep up. So he keeps slowing down, he keeps hitting more hits, and he keeps becoming more vulnerable. It's easier to land a double pings, your damage keeps going up. It's a really vicious cycle, and the battleship can't really do much about it. If you land a double ping, you can basically ping him anywhere on the ship after that. It'll still keep your double ping active, but it won't refresh it. Another citadel on him, the ping runs out, but once again I already have the next ping going, and you saw that I broke his engine. At this point the game ended. This is especially bad for any sort of battleships that rely on hydro, like for example Hello Mr. Kurfürst. You'll note the ping is significantly slower because I'm on the surface now, but that's because I didn't want to dive here because there's submarines and all sorts of stuff around. But the point is, this Kurfürst, well, he's gotten pinged. I think he damaged on the ping earlier. Or even if he didn't, it doesn't matter. The tracking is so aggressive, even if he's running Hydra and he sees the torps coming, he can in no way dodge the level of homing torpedoes coming his way. I launch 6 from the nose, that was a double ping, and then I launch another 4 from the stern. This is the advantage of the Balau, being able to launch from both sides, and it's just a constant cycle of homing torpedoes closing the distance with him, and his Hydra doesn't really help him a whole lot and doesn't really defend him against the non-stop barrage of torpedoes that is coming his way. At this point, I don't really even need to dive. I'm just spamming them at me. He's got a broken engine and he's flooding, and he's basically hating life. And there's constant more torpedoes coming his way, and he's constantly being pinged. He got damage gone up. Your torpedoes lost their target, but it looks... oh, was that on someone else? I'm not sure. Or maybe I think it just ran out. But I already had a ping on the way, and he's already re-pinged, and there's already more torpedoes coming his way. And of course, when he's got a broken engine, he also becomes a really, really easy target for anyone else. That doesn't mean that these things are some sort of super destroyers, though. This is a pretty good example of trying to kill a CV. I've gone all the way through into the enemy spawn to spot him, and I launch my ping on him, and his 1 minute immunity kicks in. And at this point you can see next to me is a Derrick, a DD that has both torpedoes and guns, and he's just nailing him with non-stop damage output, and I'm not doing any damage. At this point I'm going for the white line torpedoes. I've sped it up, of course, but he's still immune to my pings, and my torpedoes are still traveling. So many times the submarine is just fundamentally completely useless when it comes to supporting your team in any way whatsoever. You can't help DDs fight other DDs. You kind of suck at helping anyone subs fight other subs. You just really suck at supporting in any way. And on the other hand, for DDs, running into a submarine is basically a free kill. It's a drive-by. It doesn't take any actual skill or any mechanics. Like in this case, I'm in my Clavera, I'm hunting a Shima, a sub pops up. I take a slight detour over this submarine, and I press G, the depth charge button, and the depth charges. I don't need to do anything else except basically sail near him, press the button, and I one-shot him from 100 health to 0 in just a few seconds. He's counterplay, like he's just a roadkill for real destroyers. So submarines are often quite pitiful. Speaking of anti-submarine warfare, we were hoping that they would give the Holland, because it has these forward-launching special depth charges that are supposed to activate upon hitting a target. We were hoping they would do something special, but the level of laziness that we see here is kind of incredible. Instead of the depth charges flying sideways, they took the same animation and they put it on the bow of the ship. So you're basically launching depth charges that explode underneath your own ship, which would of course break the keel and sink the Holland. So basically as lazy as you can get on the implementation when it comes to Holland's special ASW. That doesn't mean that submarines are always boring, even though it is a lot of pinging and stuff. Sometimes it can get hectic, like in this case, I'm trying to torpedo Goliath, and suddenly I get spotted by a submarine behind me, and there's a Z-52 closing the distance from the right. I get sonar locked on, you can see the indication from where I'm being sonar pinged, and at this point I'm waiting to see the torpedo indicator, and I'm basically going to the surface as quickly as I can. I damage con the sonar lock-on, so I don't eat all the torpedoes, and I try to go above them. I end up eating one, but I dodge most of them. I surface, use the back torpedoes on the Z-52, who's closing the distance a bit too aggressively and doesn't respect the torpedoes. I kill him off, and then I dive around this U-2501 who was trying to sink me. And I actually managed to disengage from here, because they don't really have a whole lot of tools that can chase me. In fact, heavy cruisers don't really seem to have any tools whatsoever against submarines, so their counterplay is incredibly limited as well. As long as you have mana, fairy dust, they don't really seem to be able to do a whole lot, and I'm able to disengage from this situation. So there are moments, like this moment, I'm watching a Republic, I think, that's sinking over here. And in fact, I go into cinematic view to watch, like, wow, that's actually really cool, being underwater and seeing him sink to the bottom of the ocean. And then, right as I'm being a bit hyped and impressed, it just fades away and disappears. Because Wargaming didn't really bother to put any more effort into it than that. So the ships that are sinking underneath, they kind of just fade away into nothingness. Which really, I mean, it does kind of kill the immersion. And there are some good things like the Hydrophone that I'm pinging. All subs have one. It's a default consumable. It spots nearby enemies every 15 seconds. It's active for 30 seconds, so you normally get 3 pings. In this case, I'm pinging a Hakuryu, and he's actually low enough HP, so I don't need to bother with any of my homing sonar pings. I'm just gonna surface and drop a full set of torpedoes on him, because he's basically caught with his pants down right next to my submarine. And before he really has time to react, I got 6 torpedoes on the way. No lock-on or anything, but I don't need it, because the alpha is enough to sink the Hakuryu, and I'm able to disengage from the Halland, or the Halland doesn't even bother to chase me at this point. There are these moments where you go like, wow, this is kind of cool, like surfacing next to a carrier that you just sank with your torpedoes. Like, the concept is cool, but then there's all these mechanical issues, like the fact that they're immune to your pings, and things like this happen extremely rarely, and normally killing the CV is just significantly easier with a destroyer or basically any other ship, because ultimately subs just end up feeling like poor destroyers. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't occasionally catch DDs off guard. You are able to launch torpedoes straight forward, which can be an advantage if you manage to jump them in small narrow channels like this Halland here. Obviously he can gun me down, which I can't do to him, but I'm closing the distance so quickly, and I go to periscope depth to make it a bit harder for him to actually land his shells. And I just start dropping torpedo sets. He jukes the first 2 with a hard turn to the left, but I keep 1 more set for that hard turn. And as he goes for it and starts dropping depth charges, he ends up eating one of the torpedoes and ends up being sunk. Of course, if he had been full HP like I was, then my chances wouldn't have been very high, because then he could have just basically sailed past me and dropped depth charges, and that would have been the end of me. As for sub versus sub gameplay, I'd say it's a bit improved. The magical fairy dust maybe helps a bit, that if it's 2 potatoes fighting each other, they will eventually be forced to surface, but I still don't think it's a correct way of implementing it. I still think it should be a rechargeable thing. It shouldn't recharge underwater. You'd be forced to surface, like, let's say every 2 minutes or something, or 1 minute 30. I mean, they can play with the numbers, but the idea is that instead of having the set value, it's something that you could play around. You surface, you recharge it, your detection goes up, and then you go underneath and so forth. This is a U-2501, and I played both the U-2501 and the Balao, and the Balao is just hilariously much better than that, but than the German sub. The German sub doesn't have any back torps. I launched them a bit too early there. They don't have time to activate, otherwise I would have killed him right there. But the U-2501 doesn't have any back torps. It only has 6 forward torps, whereas the Balao has 6 forward and 4 back torpedoes. Also, the Balau handles significantly better. It has 14.2 km range on the torps. The U2501 has something like 10.9. There's a whole host of. It has more health than the U2501. Honestly, there's a whole set of issues. I'm not sure why, but I tried playing them both, and I've had some pretty good games in the Balau, pretty decent games, whereas most of my games in the U2501 have only been trash. And you can really outplay it pretty easily, like in this case I juke past him and then I drop my back torps on him, landing 2, and at this point he's already running out of battery. So I know he's about to surface, so I use this really tight turning circle, which is once again significantly better. I set a ping on him so I know where he's going to surface, and then I just turn my ship around and I'm gonna preemptively drop torpedoes where he's about to surface, because with no battery he doesn't have any choice. I'm not sure if letting people know, I don't know why I know his battery level. I think that's also a poor choice. I don't think the opponent should be allowed to know the enemy's battery level. It's like knowing if someone has torpedoes loaded or knowing if someone has their main guns loaded. You shouldn't know if your enemy has their battery, what the battery level of the enemy is. That's just silly. Like, how on earth are you supposed to know that? Just another stupid mechanic. Fundamentally, though, this big same issues still remain, and that is for battleships, they basically can't do shit. They're just free targets. And another issue, the biggest issue really, is the emptiness on the server. It's still gigantic, because you got to remember that with, like in this game, with 3 people playing subs, and if you look at the top, 3 people are playing subs, 4 people are playing destroyers, and 1 guy is playing a carrier. We actually have 4 surface ships, 3 battleships and 1 cruiser. That's all the surface ships. So all the subs and all the DDs and the CV, they're all hunting these few surface ships, because those are the only targets that they can really consistently deal damage to. And Wargaming still hasn't addressed this, and they still haven't fixed it. And this is, in my opinion, the single most glaring issue, is that these big tier 10 maps, they feel so stupidly empty when there's literally 4 surface combatants and everyone else is these stealthy hidden ships that generally don't take much part in the rest of the combat. And until Wargaming finds a way to solve that, I honestly don't see how they could possibly ever implement the subs, even in their current extremely questionable version, how they could possibly ever manage to implement them. They need to bump up the player limit to at least 15, but then I think the server can't even handle it, so I honestly don't know where they're supposed to go from here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my take on the subs, and as always, if you do feel like dropping a sub to the channel, I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you for watching.